The movie begins with a man wandering around a dark forest at night. He is named Oran, and he is praying to God for forgiveness. The man repents all his bad deeds and sins. After his wife passed, years ago, he employed dark magic to capture a Jinn, and made the poor being live with him in her image. He deeply regrets his actions, and is currently praying for forgiveness. As he wanders around, he comes by a lake and boards a ship. The man is so regretful that he is willing to give his life for God. There, inside the dark waters, he finds a strange amulet floating around. He grabs it and takes it out, along with a huge box attached to it. Behind him, he sees two spirits floating around the place on another ship. Beside the lake, he lights up a small bonfire and throws the amulet inside it to burn. He opens the box, but suddenly the spirit of his deceased mother appears. The ghostly woman screams at him, blaming him for her demise. The man gasps awake, and it turns out it was just a nightmare. He gets up from the small mattress that he was lying on. The man goes to another corner, where there is a box with a huge lock. The man kneels before the box and continues chanting about his repentance. The scene shifts, and we see a family of 6 having dinner. They look cheerful and happy as they eat silently. Everyone laughs and jokes around, except Efsun, who remains quietly seated, playing around with her food. The old man sitting at the head of the table soon finishes his food and bids them farewell. He goes into his room and gets ready for bed. The man puts the frame of his late wife beside him, before dozing off to sleep. On the other side, we see Efsun's mother, Turkin, who enters her daughter's room with a glass of milk. The little girl looks a bit worried. With wide scared eyes, Efsun asks her mother if she is sick. She then shares that she had a dream last night, in which Turkin hanged her sister and Efsun's 2 other sisters. Turkin assures her that it was merely a nightmare. She responds affectionately, comforting the little girl, and assures her that she is perfectly fine and she just had a nightmare. That's all. Outside the house, we see a strange suspicious lady sneaking into the cellar of their house. She creepily walks in and buries a strange jar inside. Meanwhile, Efsun is sleeping in her room when suddenly she becomes possessed. A strange and terrifying entity appears at her door, and she looks as if she is being controlled by the entity. The poor girl thrashes and claws at her sheets, and is forcefully thrown down on the floor. Her hair starts covering her face, and the terrifying demon entity crawls above her, speaking to her in an ancient language. Suddenly, the poor Efsun finds herself in an entirely different place, where her entire family is gathered. They sit like lifeless dolls around a strange table inside a cave. Before the pitiful and scared girl can grasp anything, the terrifying demon entity instantly appears before her with an ear-splitting scream. The girl, startled, screams back and gasps awake, back in her own room. On his work site, Efsun's father, Yasar, sits speaking to one of his friends, Ismet, about his stepmother's desire to claim his father's entire inheritance. He tells the man how greedy her stepmother is becoming, and how he thinks that she married his father for his money. They have been arguing about the inheritance back and forth, and as a result, she has filed a lawsuit against him. Ismet comforts the poor man, and gives him a little hope of making things better. After a while, Ismet leaves, and Yasar is left all alone. He calls the chief asking when he will arrive, and the man tells him about a few minutes. As he cuts the call, suddenly he hears some strange noises around him. The lights go off and he is stuck in pitch darkness. When he lights a torch, he discovers a woman standing with her face to the wall. The creepy woman, whose face is veiled, declares her intention of obtaining his entire inheritance. Meanwhile, a trolley filled with stones moves towards the woman and hits her. Yasar is terrified and quickly rushes over to her. He removes the veil to find a possessed body which claims that it is tormenting his daughter because of his wife. He then witnesses Efsun in a demonic form, but the illusions quickly disappear with the arrival of a truck. The chief finally arrives and sees Yasar in a terrified state, crouched in a corner. Back at home, Efsun sits in her room, creepily looking at a pet rat. Meanwhile, in the other room, her aunt is looking at a photograph. She gets up after hearing some noise coming from the cupboard, and goes to open it. The cupboard is littered with a lot of dolls. She takes out a green dress and closes the door shut. In the other room, Turkin and her husband talk about the inheritance problem and their children. On the other side, Turkin's father, Burhan, is sleeping in his room when suddenly he awakens to the voice of his deceased wife. The poor man sees terrifying visions of a snake and blades. He soon finds himself on the table, terrified to the core. There, he smashes his fragments of broken blades stuck to a bar of soap. Meanwhile, Turkin awakens in the middle of the night and starts looking for her daughters. She descends the stairs to find Burhan in the kitchen, who carelessly informs her that her daughters are outside. She becomes scared and quickly runs out to find them. Outside, she hears their laughter coming from the cellar. Quickly descending into the cellar, she finds Yagmar wearing a bunny mask and pointing at a particular spot. The woman keeps hearing sporadic laughter. There, when she looks ahead, she sees Damla walking behind Efsun, also wearing a bunny mask and singing a song. They walk around for a while, and suddenly Efsun appears before her, grabbing her mother's neck. The woman gasps awake from the terrible nightmare. A terrified Turkin quickly gets up to go to her daughter's room and finds them sleeping. However, when she goes to Efsun's room, she finds her wide awake. The girl curtly tells her mother that she is not feeling well. On the other side, we see Oran sitting in a place with an older-looking man. They talk about how Oran turned himself around after the nefarious deed that he committed. The man has ever since become repentant, and goes around praying to God and asking for forgiveness. After the incident with Kater, he can see spirits. The older wise man believes that it is a gift, but tells him to beware of the evil creatures. The longer he looks and interacts with darkness, the more darkness will interact with him and fill him up with dark energy. After an insightful conversation, the old man wishes Oran well. The next morning, we see Turkin making breakfast when she is approached by her little twins. They happily tell her how their grandfather gave them money and is now going to give their elder sister money too. Efsun then goes to Burhan's room and inquires why he hurt. Burhan remains silent. Efsun proceeds to tell him that last night she dreamt of their entire family dying. At that moment, Burhan hears the voice of his deceased wife, causing him to panic and drop his medication. As he bends down to pick them up, Efsun informs him that there is something evil inside her that whispers to her. Suddenly, the spirits of Efsun and her grandmother haunt him, causing Burhan to recoil in extreme fear. Efsun calms him down and guides him to sit in a chair. She then proceeds to creepily smile back at the old man, in an attempt to reassure him not to be afraid, as grandma will come. Meanwhile, Turkin is cooking when she discovers pieces of blades inside the food. She notices more pieces, some with letters written on them. Before she can fully comprehend the situation, the ghost of Burhan suddenly appears and scares her, causing the poor woman to become frightened and stumble back. As she gets up, she realizes that the pieces of blades are no longer there. Her twins come rushing in after hearing her scream, but she assures them that everything is all right. Meanwhile, Yasar is at work when he hears strange noises of someone wailing. He follows the sound and finds a strange woman crying, with her head against the wall. As he approaches her, it turns out to be the ghost of Jonan, who confesses that she prayed for her sister's demise so that she could have Yasar all for herself. The ghost of Jonan then attacks the man, who falls on his back. It spews blood on him, and he shrieks. Suddenly everything disappears, and he comes back to his senses when his friend pours water on him. Meanwhile, Jonan is in the hospital doing her rounds when she hears noise coming from one of the rooms. She enters to find an elderly woman moaning in pain. She decides to bandage her feet. As the woman turns around, she sees the ghosts of Turkin and her daughters covered in blood, sitting on the next bed. Turkin tells her that she has done something very terrible. Jonan becomes extremely terrified and falls down, screaming. Hearing her screams, her friend quickly arrives, and everything goes back to normal. On the other side, watching his little panic attack, one of his friends advises Yasar to go see a doctor. Back at home, Turkin goes to Burhan's room, tending to his wound. She asks about how he got injured, but the old man keeps pushing her away, saying that it's all right. The woman finally leaves the man alone. In the next room, the twins are making animals with clay, arguing about which one is cuter. Efsun, while listening to their conversation, gets confused and mishears them speaking ill of her. She is pulled out of her strange reverie with one of them calling out to her. Meanwhile, Turkin hears someone crying outside her house. She follows the noise to see Jonan, sitting outside and crying loudly. When the woman asks, Jonan informs Turkin that she saw her sister Damla and Yagmur. Turkin pleads with her to stop saying such things, but she keeps describing the scene in detail. The woman freaks out and gets angry at her sister. Suddenly the twins arrive, asking who she is talking. When Turkin turns around, she finds no one there. Suddenly, Jonan enters from outside, having returned home. On the other side, Burhan is once again plagued by the haunting ghost of his wife. As he sits in the room, suddenly he hears her voice, and something falls on the table. The voice urges him to pick up the fallen object. He finds a key there. The man, trembling with fear, picks up the key and goes to enter a room. There, he finds the ghost of his late wife, lying in bed, requesting him to turn on the TV. Burhan complies, and she accuses him of attempting to slaughter her, claiming that she was in immense pain when she passed away. For a long time, she lived in fear that he would come to take her life, and she passed away from that pain. She then asks him to lift the blanket, and when he does, he sees his wife's head there. It becomes covered with a plastic bag, and then the TV turns off, leaving no one there. Meanwhile, Efsun is sleeping in her room when a strange demonic entity comes slithering in. Suddenly, it jumps on top of the poor girl, scaring her. She finds herself in a place where her family's corpses are lying. Numerous demonic spirits start crawling there, causing Efsun to scream and abruptly wake up. When she gasps awake, she finds the same demon in her room. She tries to hide under her blanket, but when she looks again, she finds the same demon standing behind her strangely evil form near the ceiling. On the other side, we see Oran performing a ritual where he pleads with the jinns to leave him alone. During this, he starts having visions in which he sees Kater and Efsun, finding himself in an unfamiliar location. Suddenly, his mother's ghost appears, to whom he pleads to leave him alone. Oran then abruptly gets up. The next morning, the twins are whispering about a dream that they had when Efsun enters. They tell her how they both saw her in their dream. Their elder sister asks if they would leave her, and the twins cheerfully tell her that they will always follow her around. Meanwhile, Turkin is outside hanging the laundry, when she suddenly feels dizzy and falls down. Through her blurred vision, she sees an illusion of herself sitting on the chair with her daughter. Efsun tells her about Jonan. She says that her aunt can't have children and hates Turkin. The woman gasps awake from the strange and scary illusion. She finds Efsun sitting beside her, calling her to wake up. On the other side, Jonan is again plagued by the strange spirit, this time in the shape of Efsun. She sees the evil spirit in the lift, with a picture of her with Efsun and her parents. Back at home, Burhan is going crazy. He constantly hears his wife's voice accusing him of her attempted slaughter. Back at his work, Yassar is again haunted by the strange voices. He follows them around and comes up to a secluded area. There, he gets surrounded by boxes, and suddenly two strange spirits appear. The man screams, terrified, and falls back, trembling in fear. That night, we see a very distraught Efsun seeing her mother talking over the phone with her friend, and sneaking out to go into the cellar. There, the little girl digs up the jar, and as she looks at it, we see her possessed face. Turns out, she is currently being controlled by an evil entity. The possessed Efsun then brings Yassar's deceased father to her stepmother's house, telling him all about her greedy desires. Her grandfather's spirit nears the woman, who screams in fright. Efsun reveals that this woman wanted to take Yassar's life and claim all the inheritance after his passing. However, her plan did not succeed. On the other hand, Jonan hears strange sounds and starts moving towards the cupboard. Just then Efsun passes behind her, and the cupboard door opens, causing all the toys to fall out. All the dolls creepily get covered in blood and start moving towards Jonan, chanting in unison that she will not have children. Jonan becomes extremely frightened and falls back on the bed. Suddenly, a possessed Efsun brings a bloody toy near her face, telling her it's Jonan's baby. The woman gasps awake from the bloody nightmare and immediately starts crying. Back in a secluded place, we see Yassar's stepmother going to a Haja and asking him for help, but Haja tells her that he had already warned her about the dangers of cursing someone. He reminds her about the backfiring of evil curses. The crying woman leaves. She then goes back to the cellar of Efsun's house to retrieve the jar, but it is no longer buried there. Suddenly, the possessed Efsun asks her if she is looking for the jar. The terrified woman screams and flees, after hearing her say that she can no longer stop her. Efsun stays in the cellar, along with the cursed jar, and continues to haunt everyone in the house. She makes Oran see the ghost of his wife sitting on a chair and calling out to him, with her voice coming from his hearing device. The ghostly woman slowly moves towards him and says she is behind him. As the man turns, the woman suddenly starts choking him with a plastic bag. The poor man passes away, after a little struggle, finally freed from the torturous hell. Back downstairs, Efsun is creepily smiling at her torturous deeds. The same night, Oran is again haunted by his mother's ghost, who keeps calling him to come and meet her. The next day, Oran visits his mother's grave to offer prayers. Meanwhile, Burhan's funeral is taking place on the other side. There, Oran senses the evil Jinn possessing Efsun. He advises the Jinn to leave her alone. Turkin takes her twins and goes to her sister's house for a few days. But Efsun remains back, for fear she might hurt her sisters. She confesses to her father how she sensed when her grandfather passed away, but the man takes her words lightly and tries to comfort her instead. Back at home, Yassar sneaks into Jonan's room and finds a photograph in Jonan's drawer. Her suspicion is slowly turning into reality, as he thinks that Jonan really might have a crush on him. Efsun watches him with a smile from outside. That night, Efsun is possessed once again, and is swinging in the cellar. Meanwhile, Oran stands outside her home, contemplating why he came. Suddenly, the cellar door opens, and Oran enters. He finds his mother there, who blames him for her demise. He moves back, but is then approached by Efsun, who appears behind him and starts speaking to him in Kater's voice. Oran realizes it's the trickery of the Jinn, and quickly exits the cellar. He remembers the box that he keeps with him, and finally leaves the place. On the other side, we see a tormented Jonan crying in the storage room of the hospital. When her eyes start to blur, she gets up and administers a few eye drops. Suddenly, her mother, Turkin, and Efsun's ghost appear in the room, blaming her for helping out her sister. They violently torment her, and ultimately, the woman passes away. On the other hand, Oran goes to the Imam, who informs him that when a Jinn possesses an innocent body, it becomes incredibly powerful. He explains that it was no coincidence that he met Efsun at the graveyard. He met her to either help her or confront his own fears. Meanwhile, Oran sees his mother's ghost there, and suddenly the Imam's form turns demonic and grabs his neck, warning him that he cannot handle demons he doesn't understand. However, it turns out to be just another vision. He soon bids farewell to the Imam and goes to offer his prayers. Afterwards, Oran finally destroys Kater's belongings by burning them with a heavy heart, and with tears dripping down his sad eyes. Back in her sister's house, Turkin has a nightmare. She gasps awake and finds them missing. The woman runs out to find them near the well, looking down. As she calls out to them, they laugh and flee the place. They start running and enter a building. Turkin follows them and enters the eerie and strangely haunted house. There, she witnesses strange things, which terrifies her immensely. She then hears her daughters laughing under a bedsheet, and when she lifts it, she sees a horrifying Efsun. The woman gasps after seeing the girl. Efsun mocks the woman, reminding her that she is her dear Efsun. Then the demonic creature attacks Turkin and tortures the woman to oblivion. We see the possessed Efsun back in the cellar, holding the cursed jar. Back in his quarters, Oran summons the Jinn and finally sits face to face with the possessed Efsun. He asks Jinn what she wants from the poor girl. The Jinn, in the form of Efsun, reveals that she was adopted by Yassar and Turkin when she was 3 years old, after her parents passed away. As they couldn't have children of their own, they loved her dearly. However, when Turkin had her own 2 daughters, she wanted to get rid of Efsun, and Jonan assisted Turkin in this plan. Jonan provided Turkin with lead powder and instructed her to mix it into Efsun's food, causing her to go mad, and finally pass away slowly. The Jinn further reveals that Yassar's stepmother performed black magic to slaughter Yassar, driven by her greed for the entire inheritance. However, in the process, she opened a portal through which an evil entity entered, deciding to get rid of everyone. The Jinn states that she is not the only one who tormented Efsun. Her mother also tried to, and her jealous aunt assisted her mother. Oran, after hearing the poor girl's entire story, acknowledges that this girl has already suffered a great deal. He orders the Jinn to leave her alone and no longer torment the poor soul. When the Jinn refuses, Oran starts reciting prayers, and we witness him entering another realm. There, he is surrounded by a circle of blazing fire. With the demonic Jinn crouched before him, he demands the Jinn to reveal his face and name. The Jinn discloses his name as Yazidra. Oran declares that he has no right to bring this body into the realm. The Jinn retorts by mocking the man. He calls him a sinner, and someone who has no right to order the Jinn. The man confesses that he has already surrendered himself to the merciful and forgiving God, having burned everything that remained of Kader. In a climactic moment, Oran asks the Jinn to leave Efsun and take possession of his own body, since he considers himself a sinner. Suddenly, the Jinn screams loudly, startling Oran, and a multitude of entities begin crawling towards him. A fierce battle ensues between Oran's unwavering faith in God and the Jinn's attempt at possession. The Jinn attempts his best to possess him. However, Oran relies on his belief in God to fight back against the Jinn. Eventually, Oran's faith triumphs, and the Jinn is destroyed. He comes back to his senses as soon as the cursed object falls down and breaks apart. There he sees Efsun return to her own body, with no traces of any possession. She smiles at the man who helped her out of her misery. On the other hand, Turkan's sister rescues her daughters from jumping into the well. Yasar and Efsun finally reunite with the girls and bring them back home. Meanwhile, Oran confronts the evil Haja who helped Yasar's stepmother cast the dark curse and bring the tragedy to an entire family. Oran's eyes have a strange glow to them, as if he bears some kind of supernatural power. The movie ends with Oran standing on the edge of a cliff, remembering the Imam's words that he has a gift. He now wholeheartedly believes in it. He indeed has a gift, as there are no coincidences in this world, only conformities. And indeed, one can find miracles hidden deep in these conformities.